So, colleagues, you'll remember that our committee, together with the House Business and Labor Committee, met jointly last spring in a lengthy public hearing on the subject of minimum wage. We heard some very compelling testimony, I think, from a number of workers and also from small businesses, people from all over the state. And the testimony raised a number of questions about just who low-wage workers are, what their needs are, and what economists say about the impact that a rise in the minimum wage could have on employment. So, we knew that we had to dig deeper into these questions, and immediately upon, or actually just before the end of the 2015 session, Representative Holvey and I convened a group, invited a fairly broad array of people to be part of the process of digging into these questions. And then many others came forward who wanted to be part of the process. So we had people from a number of different areas. We had advocates for increasing the wage. We had the state's major and some minor business associations, including small business, agriculture, restaurant industry, human services, nonprofits, BOLI and other state agencies, and then legislators from both parties were there. We had four meetings, and over the course of those 4 meetings, we covered a number of topics. And these are those that come to mind, and Jan can correct me or flesh it out. We had a thorough presentation on who the minimum wage workers in Oregon are. We got that from, mainly from the Employment Department, from Graham Slater and his associates. Who they are in Oregon and across the U.S. We looked at what it means to be self-sufficient. To be able to provide for your family without government support or charity, public or private support, and how that standard of what it means to be self-sufficient varies around the state. We looked at the variety of factors that keep families from being self-sufficient, along with low wages, of course, those things that keep them in poverty, including the high cost of housing, childcare, and a lack of technical training that can get them higher wage jobs. We looked at the challenge of the benefits cliff, that if people earn so much that they're no longer qualified for public benefits, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? We looked at that. We heard from people from DHS about that. We looked at the potential revenue that could come in as a result of the higher income taxes that will be paid by Oregonians who would be earning higher wages, along with the results of the escalator effect of more wages being spent in local businesses and that economic activity leading to higher state taxes. And what do we do with that money? How can we use that money perhaps to mitigate potential harm? And finally, we looked at the various new minimum wage laws and initiatives that are underway in various cities and states, and how those policies how those entities have crafted policies with different wage levels or different phase-in timelines based on a number of factors in an effort to try to do the most good for the most people while having the least risk of harm. So my hope is to use today's hearing as a way to close the circle on those discussions, on that research, and to begin to move us forward towards a legislative solution. We know that there are initiatives out there that are destined for the November 2016 ballot, and we'll be hearing from representatives of those two campaigns. But I've heard a lot of desire from people on all sides of the issue for the legislature to try to come up with a legislative solution to this problem in February if we can. And to come up with something that's more nuanced, more workable, something that people could get together around, and that would eliminate the need for us to go to the ballot. So that's really the reason for today's hearing. A week from tomorrow, I think, is our deadline for submitting bill requests from our legislative council. And I do intend to submit a request having to do with the minimum wage. And so, I want us to have a last chance to hear from people in the trenches to give us some ideas about what ought to be in such legislation. So, with that, we have a number of panels, and I'd like to start with the first panel, which is just the experience of low wages and poverty in Oregon. And I want to call up Gladys Hernandez and Reverend Mark Knudsen, please. And as they're coming up, we have a shift in panels. The next up is going to be the City of Portland, City Club of Portland is going to give a report on their recent report. But for logistical reasons, we have to flip out to the next panel. So panel 3 will be coming up next. Okay, welcome both of you. Thank you for coming to Salem.
Sure, Deborah, and members of the committee. My name is Gladys Hernandez, and I work for Hanley at the Portland Airport. I worked there for pushing chair for 8 years and continue to making the minimum wage. My only raises have come from the annual inflation adjustment that the state makes. As many of you know, this year there won't be any adjustment to the minimum wage. While 25 cents per hour may not sound like much to you, I have come to rely on those small increases just to survive. Without this raise, my difficult financial situation will get even worse. The only way my husband and I even get close to paying for the bare necessities is by renting out a room in our house to a stranger. Without that extra income, we would be on the street ourselves. My husband recently lost his job. With a single minimum income and no benefits, we simply can't afford the basics in life. The mortgage always gets paid late, meaning those late fees and the interest on them keeps tracking up. We can afford even the most basic of health plan, meaning we can afford to go to the doctor or have any kind of preventive care. I'm supposed to have an annual screening breast cancer, but I haven't had one in the last 5 years. Going to have one would mean we won't be able to pay the electric bill for a month, and we will go without. So I choose to keep my stove running, the lights on, and the heat above freezing, instead of having the necessary care to catch a potentially life-threatening situation. These are the kinds of decisions I and thousands of others like me have to make on a daily basis. I would love to have health insurance. I would like to know that I can catch something before it becomes too serious. And even if I did, there would be options to help me cover it. But the way things are now, we cannot afford insurance, we cannot afford to go to the doctor, we cannot afford to save even $1. I push wheelchair for Southwest Airlines, a company that made $1.1 billion a year last year, and I want to know where is the money going. My coworkers and I were not greedy. We know business is about making a profit, but what about those people who make the company successful? Shouldn't we share in that success? They could do better for us. Portland Airport was just ranked the #1 airport in the country for the 3rd year in a row. Who makes that possible? Shouldn't we receive some of that credit and be thanked for our hard work, they could do better for us also. My husband and I, and thousands of other Oregonians like us, struggle every day affording even the most basic needs. Children will rest easy, that we can afford a simple cancer screening without losing the ability to heat our house. You, senators, every one of you, can do better for us. And I love my job. I take pride in the work that I do. I'm proud to have helped make BDS the best airport in the nation. But if I could find another job, I would. The truth is, I'm not young anymore. You can see me. And I don't have the same skill that the technology in a younger person seems to be born with. A child 2 years now, they can look for the computer. I can, it's hard for me. A $4 to $5 per hour increase in my wages would be life-changing. I would mean peace of mind. It would mean not having to prioritize between health care and the mortgage. I am not asking for much. I'm just asking to be able to continue to do my work, the work I love, while getting fairly paid for it, so I can have a standard of living that would actually be considered living. Because right now, I feel like I am barely surviving. That's all I have to tell you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hernandez. Let's hear from the Reverend, and then maybe we'll have questions.
Thank you.
Senator Denborough, members of the committee, thank you for having this hearing today and the opportunity to testify. My name is Reverend Mark Knudsen. I've been senior pastor at Augustana Lutheran Church in Portland for the last 20 years. We are a thriving, multicultural, multinational congregation called to seek justice and peace. To give ourselves away for the community, I want to underscore the voice you just heard of Mrs. Hernandez are the voices that should be most listened to in this state, in this conversation, because that's where the answer lies. And you are the ones called to implement, so it's always good to testify before you. Augustana is also not only a congregation of justice seekers and peacemakers. You can imagine 900 people behind me who would be here today if they didn't have to be at work or school or other places supporting this. And I'm just one of a large number of people of faith who are here today and have been here in the past, testifying on behalf of sisters and brothers who deserve a living wage in this state. We are also home to 6 nonprofits: Community Alliance of Tenants, the Families in Action, Interfaith Movement for Worker Justice, Well Arts Institute, Society of Haitian Arts, Culture, and Social Support, and the Irvington Preschool. So with 30,000 visits made a year just to our corner of Portland, we hear story after story after story of the impact of low wages in the state and what that means. Across our state, we are facing a moral and economic challenge, plain and simple. Thousands of Oregonians are working hard and still earning so little that it's a struggle just to put food on the table and care for their families, not only in terms of food, but housing, school, health care, child care, the list goes on. Minimum wage workers in this state are a cross-section of our community. It's all of us. They're the folks who care for the elderly and keeping our buildings clean, working at the airports. They're the people harvesting the food we eat. There are neighbors, our relatives, our friends, members of our synagogues, our churches, our temples, our mosques, and other places of worship. And there are people who put in a full day at jobs, and yet they're left having to choose between rent or buying groceries or a minimum wage. And let's be real. $9.35 an hour means if you work 52 hours, 52 weeks times 40 hours, you'll take home $19,240. Housing in Portland minimally runs $14,000 to $15,000 a year right now. You know the statistics coming out of Portland. If we raise it to $13.50, which as a person of faith I say is still not a living wage, you'd be taking home $28,080. So as you look at this legislation, do not forget the other things in this state that help families to make it. Let's not make this a win-lose battle in terms of the support families need until we get the wage to what it truly needs to be. While it's a myth that minimum wage workers are many times teenagers, they are most often women in their 30s with children. And this affects our elders, our youth, immigrants, persons of color, and that's unjust. There's a lot of talk about equity, inclusion, and diversity, but we have to make our laws match up to what we say. And this is one that must be changed. As a society, we believe it's our moral obligation to answer and ensure opportunity for every human being. In my tradition, we talk about abundant life. We live in an abundant state. We all know that. It's the economies we create and the laws we create, and you as lawmakers that we put our trust in to do justice for those who are most vulnerable, because that is how we measure the success of a state. It's not measured on how the well-off are doing, it's measured on how the most vulnerable in our midst are doing. I look at you, I know you, and I know you understand that well. We are here today, Muslim, Jew, Hindu, Buddhist, Native American spiritual leaders, Christians, and so many good people, to say it's time we raise the wages. We know the income disparities in this country. And we know one step we can take right now is to raise the minimum wage. I hope you will lead the way on it. We are here today because we believe everyone's work is important. Everyone is valued. We are here today because of shared values and shared purposes from our many traditions. We are here today because we believe in the inherent value and dignity of work, and of the sacredness of every human being, and family values mean families are able to make it, as well as singles and elders. We believe workers deserve to be paid a decent wage, recognizing the value of the work they do. We are here today because we believe our faith demands it. We are here today because the role of faith communities, the ones I've just mentioned and others, is to be a conscience in our society and to raise up the ethical and moral dimensions of life together in this state. And to remind public servants and elected leaders like you that we have a moral obligation to care for the common good for the people of Oregon. We judge our state by how others are doing. Let me just say in closing, as a faith leader, in Scripture, God gets the most angry when the widow, the orphan, the immigrant, the vulnerable are forgotten or trampled upon. It's not about sexual mores, it's about economic and social justice. If you take the Bible, which contains the Hebrew Scriptures and the New Testament, you can cross out all the things dealing with economic and social justice, and you end up with a little bitty Bible in comparison. So as people of faith, we have no choice, and as human beings, no choice but to be here today and to strongly urge you to move quickly and rapidly to raise the minimum wage, and then to look at the whole picture going forward, that families and individuals in the state, all people who reside here, can have life, have it abundantly and with great dignity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Senator Rippendale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank you both for kicking off this hearing and setting the framework for the need to raise the minimum wage in Oregon. And just a couple of very brief comments. To you, Reverend Knudsen, thank you for being here. It's good to see you again. It's particularly appropriate that you start off the testimony because, as you may know, it was a nun named Sister Miriam Teresa who in Oregon in 1912 got the first minimum wage law for women passed in the entire nation. She wasn't a nun at the time. She was a social worker named Carolyn Gleason, but she did become a nun and the head of the sociology department at Marylhurst College.
Yes.
And that was her work. And Gladys, it is wonderful to see you here because you illustrate something that I think about all the time, which is the job you do at the airport. I've experienced trying to get your coworkers to help when I'm traveling with my dad who's 93 and can't get around the airport. And I think people often assume that your job pays more than minimum wage, but of course it doesn't. And the struggle that you're experiencing and those choices are exactly what so many people, whether they're taking care of our kids or elderly parents, are struggling with. So thank you so much for the work that you do. We can do better and we will do better for you, and I'm committed to make that happen.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Saying, I have to head back to Portland. I'm chairing the Northwest Health Foundation Board, and our focus these 5 years is healthy beginnings, healthy communities. And we know that can't happen without families who have living wage jobs, as you all know. So thank you for championing this legislation.
Thank you. Now, you may say you have no choice but to come, but we really appreciate your time. Thank you both.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, our next panel, we have Andrea Miller and Justin Norton-Kurtzen, and then on the phone, we'll have Laura Beazer.
Hi, this is Laura.
Laura, hi, this is Senator Michael Dembro. You are now live with the Senate Workforce Committee. And we're really looking forward to your testimony. But we're actually going to start, we'll start with Andrea and Justin, because Andrea's got to head out.
Okay, that sounds great, and thank you so much for inviting me today.
We really appreciate it. So, audience, we have representatives from the two ballot measures that are on the headed to the ballot, and we also have Laura, is it Huizer?
Yeah, that's right.
Who's with the National Employment Law Project. So we'll get a state perspective, and then we'll get a more national perspective. And so, Andrea, why don't you tell us about the Raise the Wage proposal?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, members of the committee, and for accommodating my schedule. I have to run to Bend, your district, Senator, after this. So thank you for the opportunity to support increasing the minimum wage. As you know, I'm Andrea Miller, the Executive Director of CAUSA. We're an immigrant rights organization, and we are on the Raise the Wage Coalition. And as you've heard from us from so many times, yes, we're preparing to go to the ballot, but ultimately we want to have a detailed conversation with the legislature and see if we can get this passed in the February session. It is important to us to be able to have that detailed conversation because, you know, one fact is undisputable that today's minimum wage is not something that people can live on. We heard that from Gladys and we heard that from the Reverend. And right now, as the Reverend said, working full-time is just $19,240 a year. And that's really not enough to pay the basics like housing, food, and trips to the doctor, for example. And we aren't talking about folks that are just starting out their careers or entry-level positions. And I think, you know, a lot of our focus has been, and a lot of the reason why we're doing this work is looking at who is actually impacted. And I know we've had a lot of conversation about who it is, but I think it bears repeating. The average minimum wage worker is a 35-year-old woman, many of whom are the primary or co-breadwinners in their family. And demographically speaking, women and people of color are overrepresented in low-wage work. In Oregon, nearly 2/3 of low-wage workers are women, whereas women are about 50% of our state's population. And according to the American Community Survey, 20% of low-wage workers are people of color. Looking more specifically, half of all Black or African-American workers and 45% of Latinos are employed in the low-wage worker sectors. And these are folks struggling to get by to support themselves and their families despite working full-time. And I wanted to highlight two more stories. I think it's just so important to continue to think about the actual people impacted by this. One is the story of Cecile Capriel, who works at the airport as well, just like Gladys. She's a mother of 3 and she earns a minimum wage. And she's worked at the Portland airport for 8 years. And every day she puts forward her full effort in her job, but there is really no path towards getting a raise or any type of benefits that reflect the breadth and experience that she brings at the airport. And as is the case for many Oregonians working to take care of their families, working full-time, going back to school or switching careers is a much longer-term trajectory. It's not a short-term solution. So the other story I have is a single person. So yeah, you've heard a lot about families impacted by this, but it's not really much easier for single adults either. Jason, for example, is a fast food worker. He lives in Eugene, and he's worked at the same restaurant for 6 years. He was recently promoted to entry-level manager, which only got him a 40-cent per hour raise, just bringing him under $10 an hour. And even after cutting everything from his budget, like going to the movies, eating out, he still struggles to make ends meet. There are just some things that you can't cut from a budget, like paying your rent, paying, debt payments, cost of transportation. And, when you are still trying to cover those bills, it also means that you're not saving for emergencies. So, for example, Jason's wallet was stolen, and it took him several months to replace his license because he couldn't afford immediately the $60 it takes to replace the license. And as you know, he couldn't apply for a new job without that type of ID or do anything else that requires identification. So those are two really important stories to highlight. As Oregonians, as Race Away, as CAUSA, we believe in the dignity of work. And we believe that when you work full-time, you should be able to be self-sufficient and not have to rely on public assistance benefits. But the reality is, the way the rules are now, hundreds of thousands of Oregonians are working very hard every day, but they still have to rely on public assistance, costing taxpayers $1.7 billion in public assistance benefits. That's a lot of money for taxpayers to be buying, and we believe that businesses should be taking on some of that. So we believe we must change this picture. As you've heard many times, more than 500,000 Oregonians will benefit if the state wage floor were to be increased to $13.50 an hour, which is the lowest wage necessary to provide a basic standard of living, even in Oregon's most rural counties. But we also know that $13.50 is not enough, as many people have said, which is why we also want to restore power to local communities like Portland, Eugene, for example, so that they can establish a higher wage. We certainly realize that living in Portland is not the same as living in Enterprise, Oregon, in terms of your cost of living. And ultimately, I believe we need to ask ourselves, are we invested in making an Oregon where families can be self-sufficient? Or will we insist upon maintaining an unsustainable status quo where taxpayers are paying a lot in public benefits? So ultimately, we believe that raising the minimum wage is right. We know that workers and a majority of voters are with us, and we ask that you consider and take this up in the short session. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Let's hear from Justin, and then we'll release you.
Thank you.
Chair Dunborough, members of the committee, my name is Justin Norton-Kurtzen. I'm with 15 Now Oregon. So we're back here again, right? We did this last April. We all came and talked about the minimum wage, what we think should be done with the minimum wage, and we didn't get anything out of it. And we all know that that is not an issue of Republicans versus Democrats, right? Democrats hold the majority in both houses, hold the governor's seat. And while there are certainly some really strong leaders on the minimum wage among Democrats, ultimately the issue is among Democrats, right? Democrats who understand and Democrats who are holding back and aren't ready to do the right thing. So we're sort of left wondering what the point of this is. Why should we believe that this session is going to be any different? It's only a month long. The issue's not any less complicated than it was last year. If we were to get anything out of this 2016 session, if we were to get a minimum wage increase, well, what would it look like, and what would the compromise be? Would it be high enough for places like Portland or Ashland or Corvallis or Eugene? Would we leave farm workers out? Would we get a tip credit? So while we sincerely hope that we're wrong, we're pretty skeptical that anything effective on the statewide minimum wage is going to come out of the short session, which is why back in April, before the last session was even over, a number of organizations filed the 15 ballot measure. That group's now the Oregonians for 15 Coalition. That ballot measure would raise the wage to $15 per hour over 3 years, $11.50 in 2017, $13.25 in 2018, and then $15 in 2019, and index it back to inflation. Phase-in would be the same for all businesses and employers, no matter what size, and there are no new exemptions or exceptions to who gets paid the minimum wage. And just to sort of give an idea, right, I mean, over 50 unions, community groups, faith groups, and small businesses have already endorsed the ballot measure. In the first month of having our ballot title and collecting signatures, an all-volunteer force of low-wage workers and concerned people collected over 10,000 signatures already. So this is well on its way to the ballot. And I think just to sort of get a sense of where support lies, not only in this room, but really throughout the state, If you support a statewide $15 minimum wage, could you stand up for me just for a second? Great. So I think that makes a pretty clear statement, right? I mean, people are willing to come from all over the state to be here to support 15, and when you get out in the streets and you start talking to people, it's no different. People are really excited about this. People know that it's what is needed. And it's not just in Portland or in Eugene or in the urban areas that a $15 minimum wage is so important. 15 really is the right number for the whole state, even rural Oregon. Right? The Alliance for Just Society just put out their new job gap study just about a month ago that shows that a single individual with no dependents anywhere in the state of Oregon needs to earn at least $15.99 per hour in order to be able to afford the basics, save a little bit for emergencies, and stay off public assistance. MIT's living wage calculator shows that a single parent anywhere in the state of Oregon needs to earn at least $21 per hour in order to take care of their family. And again, we're not just talking about Portland, we're talking about the entire state of Oregon. And don't forget, too, that public assistance for working people in this state costs taxpayers over $1.7 billion per year, right? That's billions of dollars per year that could be going towards education, vocational programs, shoring up social services for those who can't work, or really anything other than corporate welfare and subsidizing poverty wages. So we hear from both Republicans and Democrats that 15 is too high for the whole state. It'll hurt rural Oregon. But after decades of good jobs disappearing from rural Oregon, good paying jobs are exactly what are needed. Right? It's exactly what's needed in order to increase spending in those rural economies. It's exactly what's needed to jumpstart their lagging economies. No one ever says that good jobs are bad for the economy, right? They're good for the economy, unless we're talking about low-wage workers. Then all of a sudden, the sky's going to fall. The idea that rural Oregon economies can't take a $15 minimum wage or a high minimum wage of any kind really isn't based on fact. This is based on speculation of hypothetical situations, mostly by people who don't really even support raising the minimum wage, or at least not a significant raise in the minimum wage. But we do have evidence, real numbers on past similarly large statewide minimum wage increases, right here in Oregon, right? From 1989 to 1991, the statewide minimum wage increased by 42%. Oregon Center for Public Policy put out a great piece on this. An average of 21% per year that the minimum wage increased in those 2 years, right? And the economy did great in the 1990s. We have a strong economy for the next decade, right? Small businesses did not perish and disappear, right? Entrepreneurs did not flee the state. We did well. Well, if we jumped from 925 to 15, that would be a 62% increase, and we're talking about over 3 years. That's less than 21% per year, right? It's actually a smaller increase year over year than what happened here in Oregon in 89 and 90. So the fact is that 15 is not only the right number, it's what working people need, and it's an increase that actual facts about real minimum wage increases right here in Oregon show that our economy is not only capable of handling, but capable of thriving under. But, and I agree, we agree with Andrea and the Raise the Wage folks that while 15 is the right number for the whole state, even rural Oregon, we know that it's even more expensive in places like Portland and other urban areas, which is why we agree that the anti-worker, ALEC-inspired minimum wage preemption law needs to be repealed and local control of the minimum wage needs to be restored. We need 15 and preemption repeal in order for this state to move forward and have a strong economy and keep people out of poverty. And if you won't pass 15 or repeal preemption, then we would hope the least that you could do, and what we would ask you to do, is refer these pieces to the ballot, refer 15 to the ballot, refer preemption repeal to the ballot, so that the people, the voters, can go on in November 2016 and actually make the decision for themselves and do the right thing for themselves. Thank you.
Mic check!
Mic check!
Mic check!
Mic check!
Where are more workers' voices?
Where are the workers' voices?
We are the voices of Oregon's 700,000 low-wage workers.
We are the voices of Oregon's 700,000 low-wage workers.
We all know that $15 per hour
We all know that $15 per hour
is the bare minimum.
is the bare minimum.
Working families in Oregon need more.
Working families in Oregon need more
To house their families.
to house their families.
children.
To feed their children.
To afford.
To afford.
Just the bare necessities.
Just the bare necessities.
Without relying on public assistance.
Without relying on public assistance.
That's why Oregon needs 15 now.
That's why Oregon needs 15 now.
We all know that.
We all know that.
$15 per hour.
$15 per hour
Isn't enough in many places.
isn't enough in many places.
Like Eugene.
Like Eugene.
Like Hood River.
Like Hood River.
Like Ashland.
Like Ashland.
Like the Portland area.
Like the Portland area.
That's why we need to restore.
That's why we need to restore
Local control of minimum wage.
local control of minimum wage.
15 now on local control.
15 now in local control.
15 now on local control.
15 now in local control.
Because Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
For home care workers.
For home care workers.
For child care workers.
15 now.
For janitors.
15 now.
For single mothers.
15 now.
For food service workers.
15
For
now.
security guards.
15
For
now.
nursing home workers.
15
For
now.
retail workers.
15
For
now.
rural Oregon.
15 now.
For college campus workers.
15 now.
For city workers.
15
For
now.
social workers.
15 now.
For farm workers.
15 now.
For farm workers.
15 now.
Who do you serve?
Who do you serve?
The people or Walmart?
The people or Walmart?
Who do you serve?
Who do you serve?
The people or McDonald's?
The people or McDonald's?
Who do you serve?
Who do you serve?
The people or big corporations?
The people or big corporations?
15 now and local control.
15 now in local control.
15 now and local control.
15 now in local control.
15 now and local control.
15 now in local control.
15 now and local control.
15 now in local control.
Because Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.
Because for home care workers.
Home care
For
workers.
farm workers.
For farm workers. Black Lives Matter.
15 now. 15 now. Black Lives Matter. 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 Don't violate my freedom of speech.
Okay, let's move on. Lori, you still with us?